Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is our weekend edition, the Friday edition, and this is an opportunity to really do some comparison. You'll notice we have a couple of different articles we posted, the choice between two parties and two visions of America, and a number of other things that we're going to be talking about today here on Point of View. We last week posted the Democratic platform. Today we posted basically the 2016 Republican platform because they did not update it, but it does give you a comparison, which we'll talk about. And we'll get into all sorts of other topics. We are grateful that the hurricane has not devastated every person's life, and the loss of life has been much less. So we did talk about that yesterday. So I thought we might focus on some of the pandemic issues. And one of the articles we have here is by Dr. Merrill Matthews. Would a Democrat have managed the pandemic better? But I thought for just a minute, go around the round table and just introduce our roundtable guest. Kelly Shackelford, of course, is the president and CEO of First Liberty Institute. And if you watched real closely last night to the president's address, he was one of the people sitting in those white chairs out there, right?
One of many, yeah. Yeah. It was a beautiful setting. I wish every American could have sat there, looked at the White House, the flags behind you, the Washington Monument. Really, really beautiful. I think it looked great good on
television, even though we weren't there with you. So that's the case. Dr. Merrill Matthews, of course, is the resident scholar with the Institute for Policy Innovation. And here's an article that you posted earlier in the week in The Hill. Would a Democrat have managed the pandemic better? That's the argument that former Vice President Joe Biden is making. It's kind of the argument that even Governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo, is making. He's even got a book coming out in October.
He does, about how well he managed.
Oh, yeah. So
get into the coronavirus environment in New York.
Yes, but that we will get to that later. But it just is amazing to me that a couple of weeks ago, when we were announcing who some of the speakers were for the Democratic National Convention, I wish I'd said it on air, but I did say it off air. We got Governor Cuomo. Well, I'm sure he's not going to be talking about the coronavirus. Oh, I was so wrong. He not only talked about it, thinks he did a good job, and has a book coming out in October telling us how good he did.
He's trying to get ahead of the narrative before the historians do.
That takes a lot. But what about this? You know, the argument from a number of critics, and it's not just Joe Biden. That was yesterday, Kamala Harris, and, you know, it's people in the media, that Donald Trump has made some mistakes. Okay, let's concede the obvious. Sure, you know, nobody knew what was coming, but when we have some individuals saying you don't have to wear masks and later saying you do have to wear masks, some people criticizing you for actually having a travel ban, we're all kind of feeling our way through this. And even now, when I see the things that the former vice president wants to do, except for having a mandatory mask mandate and maybe even closing down the economy again, almost everything he mentions are the things that Donald Trump is already doing.
That's right. You could argue that maybe he should have done some of them a little earlier, but given the fact that most people didn't know what the virus is going to be, because we've had earlier types of coronavirus that came in and did not create the kind of situation that we had. We managed to dodge some bullets in the past, and so Donald Trump had, even his experts at the time were saying, we don't think this is going to be a major problem. We think we're probably going to be able to handle this. He had the Surgeon General, the head of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, testifying to Congress, don't wear a mask. Stop wearing masks. They don't help. And so it was interesting because I went back and looked at the dates. On March the 2nd, Governor Cuomo was doing a press conference saying, this is not going to be a problem in New York. We got it handled. It's not going to be a major outbreak here. That was March the 2nd. It was only 11 days later, March 13th, that Donald Trump declared a national emergency. Now, should he have declared it on March the 10th or March the 8th? Maybe. But 11 days from when the governor of New York says, we got this thing solved. This is not a problem here. And 11 days later, you have a national emergency. In addition, if you go and look at the 7-day running accumulation of deaths, it peaked around April 17th. So roughly a little over a month after Donald Trump declared a national emergency, we actually peaked in our death rates and have been going down. Now in the last month or so, we've actually seen a little bit of an upturn in that. But we actually did I would argue you'd say we did fairly well. And Joe Biden going out saying we did worse than any other country in the world. Excuse me. You can say there's a couple of other countries that had better experiences, though South Korea now is experiencing an uptake again. Italy and Spain are both seeing increases again. You just cannot make the case that we handled it much worse than other countries. We're different than other countries. And when you go and look at the death rate, our death rate was about 8, was number 8 when you look at per person, the population, because we are the third largest country in the world. So you can clearly make the case that Donald Trump made some mistakes, but it's going to be very hard to make the case that Joe Biden would have done a better job.
Yeah, to me, it's just so fake, all this stuff. I mean, okay. What's funny is if you watch what the Biden campaign is doing, it's not. Notice they're not very specific.
No,
it's just Trump has done a bad job on the coronavirus, and here's how many deaths there are, or we have the blank most deaths. But it's like, can you tell me what you're criticizing? How about you tell me what the solution is? Yeah. They can't do any of that. And the closest they get to, I think this was a big mistake by Biden, saying that if it gets worse, he's going to shut everything down again. That is not. I don't think the data shows. I think the data shows the opposite. That places that have been shut down, states and countries, have done worse than places that have not shut down. But let's say it's just, let's say there even is some merit to it, maybe helping just a little bit. I don't think the country wants a shutdown. I think that's not a good move. If he thinks that the coronavirus is his only thing that he can push against Trump, and his answer is we're going to shut down the country, I'm like, is that a good political move?
I actually thought when I heard him say that, well, there you just lost the election because of exactly that point. And the interesting thing is when they claimed that Donald Trump was too slow to respond, when he banned travel from China, he got criticized by Democrats for that. When he banned travel to the European Union, he got criticized by Democrats for that. So that was too early to shut it down. I'm mystified. And of course, the other thing is, we don't know if a president has the authority to shut down an economy.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Donald Trump sometimes talks like he shut it down, and the media often talk like he shut it down, but he can issue guidance. He did not shut down the country. It was the governors who shut down the country, some stricter, some less strict.
One of the things I love about your column is it does talk about this heads I win, tails you lose kind of thing. Biden says 50 million people have filed for unemployment. Well, why is that? Because of the shutdown. So he didn't do the shutdown early enough, but then when he did the shutdown, I'm going to blame him for the loss of jobs. So, you just can't win. Heads I win, tails you lose. Let me come back after the break and just mention how this could be a very useful piece and also broaden it a little bit because if there is one governor that has been criticized in the state of Texas, it has, of course, been our governors. I want to talk about that right after these important messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Some American cities may never recover. First, there was the coronavirus pandemic, then the lockdowns, and now the protests and riots. Joe Kotkin writes about the twilight of great American cities and wonders if we can ever reverse this downward trend. Another author is more pessimistic and declares that New York City is dead forever. The pandemic has exposed the danger of densely packed urban life. City dwellers find themselves in constant contact with people in crowded, unventilated places like subways, small apartments, elevators, and offices. According to the New York Times, some 420,000 people left New York City between March 1st to May 1st. This nearly equals the city's total population increase from 1950 to 2019. More and more people are telecommuting and don't anticipate returning to their pre-pandemic lives. A Stanford economist predicts that once the pandemic ends, the online workforce will have increased from 6% to closer to 20%. Rising disorder in the cities, along with a shocking rise in homicides in Los Angeles, Chicago, and New York, are forcing many to reconsider where they live. The head of Site Selectors Guild reports that few companies want to locate in a big city and are choosing suburbs, small cities, and rural areas. Politics is another reason cited for leaving cities. The progressive rule in cities like Seattle are why Amazon is moving to the suburbs and other locations. When cities want to significantly raise taxes and yet lessen police protection, companies and even small businesses will try to move. In the next few years, many of these cities will be a shadow of their former selves. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Loneliness, go to viewpoints.info/loneliness. That's viewpoints.info/loneliness.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, privileged to have in studio with us today Kelly Shackelford and Merrill Matthews. And I just thought I might just mention for a few more minutes this particular article that appeared in The Hill by Dr. Merrill Matthews. Would a Democrat have managed the pandemic better? First of all, you have a couple of sections. Was the response too slow? Didn't Donald Trump listen to the experts? Sure seemed to be. The whole issue that I mentioned at the break, the massive unemployment that Biden talks about, and then the so-called high death rate. And it seems to me, Dr. Matthews, this could be very helpful when people are out on Facebook or Twitter and they have somebody say, well, Trump has completely blown the way he handled the pandemic. They can maybe find this article, hit it there, and just, I think, at least to a fair-minded person, not everybody making these statements are so fair about this, point out that actually, based upon those four issues that surface all the time, you've got some facts that people really need to consider.
I think so. And the fact is that when you have what they call novel coronavirus, a new virus comes in, the experts don't know what to think about this and what to do with it. So you're liable to make some mistakes, and in hindsight look back and said, well, we should have done this or we should have done that. But my goodness, Joe Biden saying if he's elected, he will impose a face mask mandate. If he were to try to have done that in January or February, he would have been going against the experts. He would have been fighting the experts on it.
Yeah, and we all know he would have never done that.
No,
right?
he would have done it.
But here's the thing that I just so miss that we don't have a press anymore.
Yes.
Because what should be happening here is, they're going to go after the president and all this, but when Biden says, and his campaign says, oh, Trump's this, and they did it at the convention, there should be press asking questions. Tell us exactly what he did wrong. Tell us, what you would do differently. I mean, we would start to get to some specifics, but everything is a platitude. It's a campaign slogan.
More than ever.
Nobody presses down to actually, and what that would do is, I mean, the press is important for a lot of reasons. It's not just that they're there to provide truth, that we don't know or whatever. They also will cause, if they ask good questions, which is what they're supposed to do, they will cause policymakers to begin looking for answers in those places. I mean, they actually are part of sort of the exchange of ideas, the marketplace of ideas. It's sort of like what we do in the free market economy is exactly what happens, with the press. I mean, you get better answers, better solutions, less costs. That's exactly what the free market, but this is the free market of ideas, and we're missing that. And this one is costing lives. I mean, it's costing lives because people are playing politics and the media is not being the media. And it's really sad because I think most people, anybody who's even curious, like I'm sitting here going, well, all right, everybody pretend that's listening. You're the president. What do you do?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what?
Even starting today, what do you do next? Yeah, what's next? Other than wait for a vaccine.
Yeah, what is the solution? I think the solution is, and this is kind of where they started, but somehow they got off track. They let the narrative be changed. The solution was, number one, don't allow any of your hospitals to be overwhelmed where people can't get oxygen or ventilators or hospital beds and people die because there's not medical care. They did that. They actually, what the president did with all these companies and making record numbers of ventilators, nobody died in this country because they did not get hospital or medical care. So that's sort of step one, right? Avoid the big when it hits all at one time. And then the second, I think, is there a vaccine or treatments, right? That's the only other thing. It's not we're going to keep these down, we're going to stop this virus. That's like saying we're going to stop the flu, we're going to stop the cold. I mean, you're not going to stop it. So the solution is, what do we do that's treatment-wise that might help? And what do we do that's a vaccine, that's a possible vaccine? And again, on those things, I think Trump has been better than anybody we would have because he's so get rid of the regulations.
Right.
And he's so, I need help from all the private companies.
Right, working with the private companies.
Yeah, and that's what in my view, again, I'm willing to learn more, but that's the solution. The solution is stop the overwhelming of the medical, which they did, and then let's find treatments and solutions, because I don't think you can stop it or keep everything down. We're like fighting a battle that seems foolish and that we can't succeed in, and it's throwing our country into chaos.
And it's almost like Joe Biden and the Democrats don't understand the issue. Once you get past a certain number of cases and you've got community spread, the issue is no longer can we contain this.
Right.
It becomes we have to get herd immunity. So when they come out and they say, what are the figures they're using now? X number of millions of Americans have contracted this. Yes, you're going. I mean, when this was started going at the early March or end of February, I mentioned somebody. I wish I could just go ahead and get it so I can be past it, because we're gonna have to get it. Mm-hmm. You're gonna you either get it or you get a vaccine or something to get you past it, and hopefully there's treatments that if you don't do either one, you can minimize the things. But when you complain about the number of people, actually, the more people who have had it, at some point you're saying, good, we're getting close to herd immunity.
Right.
We're almost past this now. So I'm mystified by some of the things that they say on this, and the fact that they did not have a plan is just apparent. And I was on television a few months back, and I said I was talking with a Joe Biden person, and I said I think we may look back at this and say we actually overreacted on some things. And he got violent on the television. He said, that's dangerous. People are going to die from that kind of thing. Well, it looks like we're actually going to have all kinds of ventilators that we didn't need. So we're going to have a fire sale on ventilators.
Let me bring up something else, because one of the things that we've done interviews with Alex Berenson. You've talked about him before. His piece that we talked about earlier in the week, we could beat COVID-19 before the vaccine is ready, because his argument is, and he's not the only one making it, because we've actually had some people that have MDs behind his name that are saying maybe herd immunity is going to be a lot lower than we thought it was. So what about that?
Mm-hmm. Well, it can be. Typically, they say for a standard epidemic, 60 to 80%.
Right.
But if it's measles, it's much higher because it is so contagious. Yeah. But some things are much less contagious. And so right now, if we because
he's talking about 20% or 40%, which is a lot different than 60%.
That's right. I've seen estimates that it's in the 25 to 40% range that already have herd immunity. Yes. So we may actually be getting close to it now.
Yeah. So again, lots of times, when we hear all this comment about, well, we're just waiting for a vaccine, maybe not. I mean, we may not necessarily need that vaccine.
Well, and again, there's the other controversy of, again, I think it's about not overwhelming the hospitals.
Right.
And the other is the treatments and the vaccine. The treatments have been thwarted because of political correctness. Mm-hmm. In other words, the whole thing that Trump was trying to do is sort of pull off the regulations and let's allow some different things. Now, obviously, you don't want people being guinea pigs with stuff, but stuff like hydroxychloroquine that's been used for, decades for malaria treatment, the idea that you couldn't see if that's working and have some places where they
dangerous.
Yeah, where they all of a sudden it's dangerous because Trump mentioned it.
And remdesivir, they say, well, that's just fine.
That's right. Yeah,
because Trump didn't mention it.
If you look at the articles would for hydroxychloroquine would always say this untested, unproven, dangerous. Yeah. But the adjectives for remdesivir was promising, hopeful, and so forth. And they're both approved drugs that neither one had been approved for this disease.
And what is the difference? Okay, they're being treated so differently. What is the really big difference? One is the pharmaceutical companies make a gazillion dollars off of remdesivir, where they don't make anything off of hydroxychloroquine. So one of the things behind all this is it's funny how big pharma used to be the target of liberals saying they're squeezing everybody, and the conservatives are like, well, they've got to have some money to do research and development, which costs billions of dollars. Now the president is the Republican, and he's knocking drug prices down.
Yeah.
And the Republicans are going, big pharma is not allowing other competition for drug and treatment. So it's interesting how all of a sudden it's a different political spectrum with regard to pharmaceutical companies.
Let's take a break. When we come back, I thought I was going to ask this question in this segment, but I'll ask it next, and that is, we have 35 U.S. Senate races, 435 races for the House of Representatives, 13 different governor's races, and it turns out that, about 86 out of 99 legislative chambers have races. Does this pandemic help or hurt a particular candidate? Love to get your thoughts. Governor Abbott isn't running this time. Maybe he's glad he's not, but we'll have to see and talk about that right after these important messages.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Top of the hour, we're going to really talk about the president's speech. And of course, Kelly was in the audience, and I think all of us have had a chance to see it. And really, such a difference between the two conventions. So we'll get into some of that in just a few minutes. But since we talked about this pandemic, and a very good piece by Dr. Merrill Matthews, which I would commend to you, I thought I'd say, obviously the president could win or lose based on this issue of the pandemic, but you also have 33 Senate elections, 2 special elections. So you have 35 Senate elections, 435 races for the House of Representatives, governor's elections. And I'd just like to go around the roundtable. Kelly, I'm going to come to you. Do you think this helps or hurts anybody? You have individuals like Kristi Noem. You had a chance to hear from her recently, and she is the governor of South Dakota. And I think most people in South Dakota said you did the right thing by not locking us down. If you ask a lot of people in the state of Texas right now, there are a few people that don't necessarily have a positive feel towards Governor Abbott. And people out in California, as we go into our national hour, they're just incensed by what Governor Newsom is doing. Some of those individuals aren't running this time, but you have state legislative races and governor's races and things like that. What about the pandemic? Any thoughts?
Well, I think it's huge. I think that most people pay attention to president, and then they don't necessarily pay as much attention down ballot. I think that's going to be different.
I agree.
I think people now, sort of these mayors and governors who've never had so much power in their lives, it also has its consequences because there are a lot of people watching this and they're going, well, I don't want him to be governor. Let's take Texas. They have got to go in the legislative session and change the law. It's outrageous that an executive like the governor can make all these decisions. There should be a requirement that yes, there might be an emergency scenario where the governor has to be an executive, but it doesn't last for months. Whether it's 2 weeks or whatever, the legislature ought to have to come into session and make these decisions. The reason is, and this is something we're working on in our briefing right now in cases with regard to constitutional rights, that you shouldn't treat an edict from an executive in his basement the same way you do a legislative enactment. If you pass a law through the legislature, hundreds of representatives are going to look at this and their staff. People are going to come testify. You're going to realize, oops, you didn't realize, but this thing actually really hurt this other group over here, and they want to come and avoid that. And testimony, interaction, back and forth, both chambers, governor, the whole deal or president, before it becomes a law. Mm-hmm. None of that happens with these edicts from the basement. And
true.
The idea that you constitutionally give those the same, deference to me is ridiculous, and it's got to be worked out in cases. But that difference is really important, and so you shouldn't allow this. You shouldn't. This is I think a real. I don't know if the right word is subversion. It's a perversion of our government, of the way we want things to work, of the way the founders, laid out for us, and there needs to be a change in the legislature. But in the meantime, people will look at this and you're kind of electing an entire legislature right now when it comes to your mayor, your county judge, your governor. And again, as you said, Governor Abbott ought to be very, very grateful that he's not up for election right now, because there's a lot of people on both sides mad because he has exercised all this power, and there are people therefore watching that aren't going to like that. And so he, who knows what he can do in the next few years before he's up for election. But I think people are going to be really looking at their county judge and their mayors and all these local elections.
Dr. Merrill Matthews, I would dare say a lot of people couldn't tell you who their county judge is. I bet a lot of them know who he is now, or who she is now, right?
Yes, indeed. And it's interesting because in some cases, as in Texas, the governor had to be a restrainer of some of the county judges who wanted to try to go even further and tried to stop them. And I think Kelly's right. I think a lot of people are going to be. I don't know how many mayors are up for re-election, but a number of them probably should be concerned about that, especially if you were in the Seattle mayor, Portland mayor, Chicago mayor, and some of these others. I think they they would be concerned, should be concerned, because I think you're going to have an awful lot of pushback from people who feel like this just was not handled. You know, the media aren't covering these things very well, but if you go and look at the local paper in Chicago and Portland, they're covering them heavily. I mean, you're getting a lot of attention in the news media there, and I suspect a lot of people, and especially suburban women, do not want to see that kind of thing happening in their city and even being supported and condoned by the mayors.
Yeah, think of, I mean, what's it? I mean, it'll be fascinating to see the election. Like, I mean, let's say the election was coming up in New York City for mayor. I don't think there's any, I mean, I have no idea, but I've got to think that they throw de Blasio out. They're destroying the city. You know, what do they do in Minnesota? What are they? I mean, Minneapolis, and I mean, what you think of all these Seattle? I mean, do they elect this again? I can't imagine. If they do, then boy, it's like the few people that decided they're not moving are deciding to move at that point, because those places, I mean, they're being evacuated. It's going to be really sad. You know, we used to think of Detroit as like a place where it's kind of hollowed out, and you wondered, can it be restored? And there were attempts. We're about to create a number of those. And one of the points of the president's speech last night and others is they're all Democratic-run cities. The top 10 in the country that are having all these problems are Democratic-run. I wonder how these local races like that also play into the national election, because he's certainly pulling it in. It's an example. It's sort of a, I don't know. It's not a Rorschach test. It's like a federalism in a way, in that let's see the Democratic approach in the major cities, and let's contrast that with, you know, here's what's going to happen nationally if the Democrats take over versus the way that the Trump team says that they are doing and will do things.
You know, and here's some of the pity of this. Tom Wheeler, mayor of Portland, has just come out saying he got a letter from a number of businesses saying, we just may not reopen our stores because of how badly the city has been damaged there, and you didn't do anything. So he's actually made a statement saying, well, there was peaceful protesters, but there was a handful of people who got riled up, but he was out there actually protesting with them.
Right.
Absolutely,
with his own protection.
Yeah,
right. He had to have protection. They would have taken him out.
And you know what's sad about this? Because over the past decade, we've talked about food deserts. Yes. Where in low-income areas they can't get grocery stores because they won't move in. And so they don't have the chance to go out and be able to buy fresh food and things like that. So they've got to go to fast food or something. Do you think these places are going to... There's reasons why this happens.
Yeah, they don't want to go back in. No business wants to go in there.
They don't want to go back in there. And so we're seeing these places hollowed out. They'll not only be food deserts, they'll be closed deserts and other kind of deserts in these places because the businesses don't want to go back in.
Fascinating. Last night, I'm walking back from the White House to my hotel because it was only about 5 blocks. And once I got through the ridiculous, BLM, which I'll describe later, but it's just pure evil what those people are doing and what they are imbued with. But as I was walking back, like a block from the hotel, I'm like, 5 or 6 blocks away. There's a Tiffany's, okay, right next to the hotel where I was going, and there's like 10 guys there. And they're boarding the Tiffany's.
Don't you know?
They were boarding it at this is at like 11:30 at night. I don't know if somebody just maybe they got reports of what was going on outside the White House, and so they send teams when that happens.
To board it up.
But can you imagine if you had to run your business to
boarding
keep
it up every night?
Yeah, to be keeping up with what was going on and to have groups that are on call to go and board up your business. I was just amazed at that and think, you think of start multiplying that. But, I mean, this is 6 or 7 blocks. I mean, it's, not next to the White House. And yet that's what was happening in Washington, D.C. last night.
Let's take a break. And let me just mention that I think it's going to be very significant. You have 43 out of the 50 states that have state legislative races. And so even people we've had on the program like Jeff Leach and Matt Shaheen and Matt Krause and Candy Noble and people like that, I mean, they're probably going to be asked questions about that. And that is certainly going to affect the legislature. And, of course, you have, as I said, 13 governor's races and 35 Senate races. But When we come back from the break, there's something else about the pandemic, and that is the possibility we won't have enough volunteers to work the polls. And this is a piece by John Funn. We're trying to get him on to talk about it in more detail, but I'll give you the details that we just mentioned the other day. But Kelly Shackelford was the one that first got my attention about this, because you'd heard John Funn speak about that. And that's a concern. As a precinct chair, I'm recognizing it's a concern in our own precinct right now, and where we are not sure we're going to have the right number of people of the right age, since some of us are kind of old now, to actually be working the polls. So we'll talk about that right after this.
Question. Will Americans vote to stop the riots, the looting, and the defund the police efforts in major cities across the country? The parties certainly understand that citizens, even those who sympathize with the peaceful George Floyd protests, are appalled at the violent turn some of the protests took. Most people abhor the violence and the destruction of businesses and the livelihoods of their owners and employees. Other than calls to defund police, we didn't hear a word about this at the Democrats' convention. Their party platform calls for removing Confederate monuments, but nothing about controlling the mobs that are often doing it. Neither is there a word of condemnation of the violence that is devastating their constituents who live and work in our cities. In fact, when federal agents are sent to protect federal property in these cities, as is their duty, the left cries foul and the media amplifies their opposition. But the general uptick in violent crime, including murder, in our cities has brought a systemic and sustained response from the feds. At a news conference last week in Kansas City, Missouri, Attorney General William Barr announced that federal state task forces have made more than 1,400 arrests as part of Operation Legend, an anti-crime initiative the Justice Department launched in early July. Under this initiative, the Justice Department has dispatched more than 1,000 federal agents to help local law enforcement investigate violent crime. This effort is named after Legend Taliaferro, a 4-year-old boy who was shot and killed in his sleep the morning of June 29th in Kansas City. The city's police, assisted by the FBI and U.S. Marshals, arrested his suspected murderer the second week in August. Operation Legend has expanded and is working now to restore peace to 8 additional cities. At his press conference, the Attorney General stated, "The most basic duty of government is to protect the safety of our citizens. Smart politicians won't ignore that." For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Top of the hour, we're going to get into, of course, the speech by the president last night, but I thought I'd bring up one other issue related to the pandemic, and this is a very good article that appeared by John Funn, and I might just mention, if you'd like to hear him, one of the things we always try to do is talk about the great conversations that take place at the Institute for Policy Innovation. So I'm going to ipi.org. Right-hand corner, you'll see it says the mail-in ballot and voter fraud threat, a conversation with John Funn. And so you can go to ipi.org and you can have a chance to join in. And in the old days, you had to be physically in Dallas to go and hear it. Now you can just log on
do that
anywhere
by
in the
Zoom.
country.
Absolutely. So they can go to ipi.org and register for that. And that's on Tuesday. That'll be September 1st at 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Central. So I'd encourage people to go sign up for that, and you'll be able to hear John and ask him questions.
And again, we talked about the one on environment and then the 23 words or whatever it is in terms of the some of that.
And John's been doing this for a long time. I think his first book was like 2003, 2006 or something like that. Then he did another one 2012, I think. So he's been covering voter fraud issues for a long time.
So he can put the fear of God into you in terms of voter fraud, but there's another concern, and that's what I wanted to talk about right now. First of all, Dr. Anthony Fauci, and certainly he's the expert, so he should know, says that there's really no reason why we shouldn't be able to vote in person or otherwise, and I'm tired of hearing these arguments. I see all sorts of people going to restaurants and going to grocery stores and everything else and say, oh, but I can't vote. Sorry. But the bottom line is we have about 900,000 poll workers, and I want Kelly to speak to that issue because without these poll workers, there's a lot of shenanigans that go on in some of these polls, which we have found out over the years. But the Pew Research Center concluded that 58% of poll workers, at least last time, were over the age of 61. So they're the least likely to want to go and actually man the poll. Now, when I went in there for the runoff, they had all sorts of plastic and all sorts of other things, but I was looking around and I said, I'm the oldest guy around the table right now, but I think I was the youngest one at that polling booth that day. So I know some of them are not going to show up. And to get a younger person to do that, we're talking about 12-hour days, and you get all of, $75. Maybe you get $100 if you're really in an affluent area. And so, Kelly, this is a potential problem, and I know our friends at Leadership Institute and some others are trying to answer it, but it's something we really need to start paying attention to.
I think it's really important. That can really affect the election. I think most people realize. I know they ought to watch. The podcast, or what is it?
It's a Zoom conference.
A Zoom conference. I think they'll learn a lot from John Funn. I've been in these presentations recently with some leaders from around the country. It's really dangerous what's going on. I mean, there's all these attempts. People are trying to take advantage of the coronavirus, and they're trying to change the laws and do all kinds of things that are really not secure. There's a big difference between mail-in voting, absentee voting, and then just mailing people at random ballots all over the place. And we're talking about anywhere from 50 to 80 million ballots just flowing through the mail to people who don't ask for them. Somebody else can grab that and vote. Somebody can harvest them. I don't know if you've seen the stories where somebody just went in the trash can and pulled out 10 of them. I mean, it's a horrible idea. But part of that is, I don't know if you saw one of the elections, I think it was New York, 25% of the ballots were thrown out.
12th congressional district. And it turns out now the one in Paterson, New Jersey, that was 24%. And they're having to do a mulligan. So they're doing another election. And 4 individuals have been charged with fraud. That thing that never happens.
Yeah. And so the point of that is, though, somebody's there to get those ballots.
Yes.
Okay? Somebody's there to look at those. Somebody's counting these things. Somebody's there on election day. Now, there are a lot of people, and I know most of the people that are listening right now with us are across Texas. I think there's some in Minnesota, some other places. By the way, Minnesota just had some massive issues in their election, some almost for sure voter fraud in the congressional elections there. And again, this stuff happens because people aren't there being election officials and making sure that things are done right. And that just doesn't mean in the nice area of town. That means everywhere. So number one, this should happen anyway. But number two, now you're going to have, depending upon what the mood's like in your area, are there rising numbers of cases of coronavirus? Are there rising numbers of deaths? What's going on? If you're 70 or you're 75 or you're 65 and you're usually an election official and things are kind of hot, then you might very easily say 2 or 3 days before the election, I don't think it's safe for me to come right now.
Right.
And this is a real concern all across the country. So both for the positive of getting people in all these places and the negative of not allowing it to get much worse, which many people think it's going to be a real problem, I would encourage everybody to think about being a volunteer. But you can't do it the day before. You have to get trained.
Right.
So you need to volunteer with your party now. And one of the things that I thought was a great idea that the Heritage Foundation is doing is they're making Election Day a day off, but they're encouraging everybody to go and volunteer and be an election official. So that's something, I don't care who you are listening to this, whatever your business is. How about, if you have a business, you'd probably like to keep it. So the election might make a difference in some of those things as to whether you're going to be shut down or not. But, offer your employees a day off if they want to go and serve as being election officials. And it's something where they might fill a slot for some of these people who are more concerned because they're older and more at risk. And we could avoid that problem. But it is a real danger, as this article that you've got on pointofview.net, points out.
And Dr. Merrill Matthews, some people might say, I'm going to ask John Fund some questions. On the Zoom call, can they do that?
They can. We'll be throwing it open for questions.
Yeah, and because I think some people are just wondering, well, what would it take to be a poll watcher? And more importantly, if nothing else, you got to appreciate him and Hans von Spakovsky, because the two of them, but especially John Fund even initially, have been writing about this idea of voter fraud for years. And what we always hear from the Brennan Center, from a lot of Democrats and others, is there's no voter fraud. And because of Hans von Spakovsky, they have all the individuals that have not only been indicted, but actually have been convicted of voter fraud. So it's a little harder to say that with a straight face, though I still see some of the Democratic candidates saying that with a straight face.
Right. And the numbers aren't great, but they can be big enough in some cases to sway an election, especially it's been pointed out, and when you're doing special elections and things like that, when turnout tends to be very low.
Yes, but as Kelly points out, in the 12th congressional district in New York, 25% of the ballots were thrown out. When I first reported on the one out of Paterson, New Jersey, which is kind of the third largest city in New Jersey, I pointed out that there were 16,000 ballots and they only accepted 13,000. They threw 3,000 out. But when they finally went through all of the ballots, they basically throw out almost 25% again.
And this is that's why I think it's so important for people. There's probably a lot of people listening on Point of View that think, well, gosh, I can't usually do. Usually talking about lawsuits for religious freedom, or working on the economic issues with Buddy or whatever, and they think, well, I can't really do that. Here's something you can do that really makes a difference.
Yeah,
I mean, go and all you pick up the phone and call whatever your party is and say, I want to volunteer on elections to do this. This is going to be a big time. Most people think, as you'll hear from John Fund, this election will not be over the night of the election.
I'm sure
that there'll be counting and stuff to do, and if we don't have good people doing that, we're going to have real problems. So this is something everybody can do who's listening to this broadcast.
Don't need a constitutional crisis in the midst of this right now, do we?
No.
So let's take a break, and when we come back on the National Hour, we're going to have a chance to hear a little bit more about the president's speech and the week of Republican National Convention. We'll be right back.
Sometimes I think about seeds. You ever stop to consider that some seeds become entire trees and some trees grow up and produce fruit? Other seeds become flowers or vines that bring us vegetables or berries. And some trees don't have fruit, but they're just pretty, especially in some parts of the country when it comes to the fall colors. Yes, sometimes my mind goes off like that. And I also think about such things when it comes to the seeds that so many have planted in the quest to impact our nation through Point of View Radio. You may think that your gift is a small thing, but like a seed, it can grow to have an impact beyond your imagination. If you want to see beauty again in America, consider planting a seed today and making a difference by joining the Point of View Truth Team. Get the details today, right now, by visiting pointofview.net/team or call us at 1-800-347-5151. Plant a seed for a great future. Cultivate truth. pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View.
And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is our weekend edition, and over the next 2 hours, we're going to try to cover as many things as we possibly can. But, of course, we are finishing off now the Republican National Convention, and so that is going to be an opportunity to do some comparison. You'll see a couple of articles we've posted on the choice between two parties and two visions, the two visions of America. Piece by Foster Fries has been on the program with us about maybe the challenge between secularists and believers, so that's good. We have posted the Republican platform, which is actually one from 4 years ago, and we'll talk about why that is posted rather than one for 2020 in just a minute. But you will have, if you look at last week, the Democratic platform and the Republican platform. But let's go around the round table. Of course, we have Dr. Merrill Matthews with us once again, the resident scholar with the Institute for Policy Innovation. And getting off of an airplane, Kelly Shackelford, president and CEO of First Liberty Institute, because you were one of those people sitting in one of those white chairs there in the south lawn of the White House.
Yeah, beautiful setting. I was trying to think. I know that there's never obviously been an acceptance speech, from the White House before for obvious reasons. But I was wondering if they've ever done an event like that there, because I've been around a long time. I've never seen anything like what that was. And I know you could probably see it on TV, but it really is majestic. I mean, to be there on the lawn of the White House, to see the White House on one side with all those American flags, and then you turn around and you're looking at, the Washington Monument, and it's just a spectacular setting. Nothing sort of more patriotic or American than that. And what nobody got to see, I don't think, is beforehand, there's sort of I don't know if you know that the back of the White House there. I guess you could see it if. Could you see they're at the microphone. Could you see above them the White House behind you? Because there's a balcony up there. There's a whole.
And they were singing opera.
That's what I was going to say.
And we all saw that before and after.
Okay, because that was awesome too. Oh,
he did a good job.
Yeah. Oh, for 30 minutes before and after, with the fireworks. He's singing Luciano Pavarotti and all these different. Yeah. I mean, it's great, and it was really good.
All you had to do is go to C-SPAN to see that. Or even when Tucker Carlson was doing an interview with one or two people, he said, well, they're singing opera here, and of course, Washington, D.C. is really known for its opera. Everybody laughs, of course, and all that. So, of course, I want to get Kelly's being on the grounds, but Dr. Merrill Matthews, let's the two of us also say that if we were watching it on television, this has been a good week. I would have predicted that the Democratic National Convention would have really good production values because they would actually have all sorts of people that they have contacts with in Hollywood.
All the media.
And all the media. And yet I think even people that wouldn't necessarily say they agree with Donald Trump have to begrudgingly admit that the Republican National Convention was much more interesting and seemed to have better production values.
I agree. I was here last Friday and we talked about this, and I just thought the Democratic Convention was painful to watch. I mean, it was hard to watch, and not because there were technical glitches, but just because they would zoom in with the zoom look, and then people would be clapping, and then they'd come back, and it just looked staged, and I thought, if this is the future of conventions, I need to get another job. But the Republican convention, I thought, just went off very, very well. You didn't have the crowds there, so you had individuals who came up. They gave their speeches. Most of them are genuine. These are real. Most of these are real people. They're not politicians. They're real people who had stories to tell. And my wife. My wife doesn't. She's an interior decorator. She's kind of interested in it, but she doesn't spend a lot of time doing this. I go down. She had the thing on. She didn't. I didn't have to watch it on the computer.
Different
because
channel. Yeah.
She wanted to watch the whole thing, and we watched. She kept going to watching CNN because she wanted to see how they respond. Poor Jake Tapper. This has got to be one of the worst week he's ever had. When they would come back to him to discuss this, he just looked like he was crestfallen because he has to go back and try to defend the Democrats on various things and try to challenge what the Republicans were saying. It was very, very interesting to watch it.
Yeah, I thought the best speeches of the best part of it to me this week on the Republican side were not the famous speeches you're used to, the vice president, the president. It was the regular people they had on. It was the guy that, again, I never thought I would see this in my life at any convention, but the guy who's talking about that he went to prison, but that he came to know Jesus Christ.
Right. Ponder.
10 minutes about Jesus Christ and his life turning around. I'm like, I'm not even sure some churches might think this is too religious, and there it is at the convention. And then the president pardons him.
Yeah.
I thought those kind of things were much more powerful. Let's take last night. To me, I love, Alice, the woman who was pardoned out of, and really kind of led a little bit to the First Step Act, which I thought she did a wonderful job, and I thought that was great. I thought that the two things that were more powerful to me, because they're obviously, you see the real life situation, was the woman from St. Louis who lost her husband.
Andorn, yeah.
And he was, I think most of us saw that horrible video where he went to protect, he was a police officer for many years. And again, this is, Black Lives Matter and all this. And here's a black police officer who was murdered, really. And for her to tell her story and what a great man he was and how he served and what his heart was, I thought that was very powerful. I also thought that the couple that lost their young daughter, who was a missionary and was captured over, I think she was in a hospital. It was near Syria, if I'm not mistaken, Syrian refugees and things.
Taken prisoner Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi
and then
ISIS.
Talking about how the Obama-Biden administration, would say they were going to do something, but they never would do anything. And then as soon as Trump came in, he took action. And again, I think that's one of those things that, it rings true. I think people know, okay, there might be things I don't like about Trump, but one of them is not that I don't think he will take action if they take my daughter, And I think I thought it was smart. They took a real story, but about something that people knew were true and that is a positive for Trump. I think one of the things never talked about, and we, I remember before the election, I said this. I said, one of the things that's a difference between the candidate is, I predicted that if Trump came in, that ISIS would not be a problem over a certain amount of time. I didn't know how long that would be. And that would mean that I don't know what the number would be, but a number of Christians would not be murdered. We saw the beheadings. We saw all this stuff. How many lives? How many Christians have had their lives saved by what happened with ISIS? And I thought, again, that reminded us of that. And I thought it was very well done.
Matter of fact, we're going to take a break, but when we come back, we might also talk about the things that weren't talked about, because many people say when I look at the Democratic convention, they didn't talk about abortion. They didn't talk about some of the conflict and the rioting in the streets. And, of course, that was front and center in a number of ways. So we'll talk about that. And, of course, if you have some comments or questions, we certainly welcome your phone calls. We are going to also talk about some of the different visions between the two parties, the differences between the platforms. We've got a lot to cover. We will do so right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Some American cities may never recover. First, there was the coronavirus pandemic, then the lockdowns, and now the protest and riots. Joe Kotkin writes about the twilight of great American cities and wonders if we can ever reverse this downward trend. Another author is more pessimistic and declares that New York City is dead forever. The pandemic has exposed the danger of densely packed urban life. City dwellers find themselves in constant contact with people in crowded, unventilated places like subways, small apartments, elevators, and offices. According to the New York Times, some 420,000 people left New York City between March 1st to May 1st. This nearly equals the city's total population increase from 1950 to 2019. More and more people are telecommuting and don't anticipate returning to their pre-pandemic lives. A Stanford economist predicts that once the pandemic ends, the online workforce will have increased from 6% to closer to 20%. Rising disorder in the cities, along with a shocking rise in homicides in Los Angeles, Chicago, and New York, are forcing many to reconsider where they live. The head of Site Selectors Guild reports that few companies want to locate in a big city and are choosing suburbs, small cities, and rural areas. Politics is another reason cited for leaving cities. The progressive rule in cities like Seattle are why Amazon is moving to the suburbs and other locations. When cities want to significantly raise taxes and yet lessen police protection, companies and even small businesses will try to move. In the next few years, many of these cities will be a shadow of their former selves. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Loneliness, go to viewpoints.info/loneliness. That's viewpoints.info/loneliness.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, Kelly Shackelford and Dr. Merrill Matthews. And I thought for just a minute we might look at the week. And one of the things was striking to me is, first of all, on Monday, it was very obvious that you were bringing in a number of speakers to try to counter the idea that Donald Trump is racist. You know, that Donald Trump and even Mike Pence are really part of a racist organization and that we have systematic racism. And there were all sorts of people that addressed that. It came back again on Wednesday. It even came back last night. And it was really striking to me to see that because, as you pointed out, we had, of course, the story last night of Ann Dorn and the story of Alice Marie Johnson. But, of course, Herschel Walker, we can go through the long list, and the Attorney General of Kentucky.
Ben Carson.
Ben Carson.
Ben
You can go
Carson.
down this long, long list, a matter of fact. And maybe part of that is to say, even if he doesn't pick up a lot of the African-American vote, the best estimates are that last time Donald Trump got only 8% of the African-American vote. We had Robert Woodson on just recently, and he's of the Woodson Center, and he was predicting he might even get as much as 16 to 20% of the African-American vote. I think that's a little high.
Yeah.
But I've heard Dr. Merrill Matthews that even Democrats admit that if Donald Trump or any Republican gets 20% of the African-American vote, they know who wins.
they're done for. Yes, they have to get virtually all the African-American and the large majority of Hispanic in order to be able to win. And if in Donald Trump, the Republicans have been, and I'm so glad to see this.
Yes.
You know, Rand Paul used to do this. He would go to the NAACP places and speak.
Yeah.
A lot of places Republicans wouldn't go. He would go and jump right in there. And I love doing, I mean, when I get invited to some place where we aren't natural allies, I love doing that. I think it's great fun. But Republicans have said the black vote and Hispanic vote, they're up for grabs, and we're going to go try to get some of them.
This has been a real focus, I think, of President Trump from day one. He talked about this. If you remember back in the campaign, he's like, look, you've been with the Democrats, look at what they've done,
or not done.
Yeah, and that's what he said. He said, what can it hurt?
Yeah, what do you got to lose?
What do you got to lose? Let me try. And again, this isn't focused on a lot. It's more like all this crazy, political attacks against Trump for what he said in Charlotte, or all these things when they mistake what he said,
right?
Intentionally, I think. But if you look at what he's done, they don't talk a lot about this. The opportunity zones, what they've done in HUD. I've seen Scott Turner talk about this. I've seen Ben Carson talk. I mean, they are really that. If you don't know, part of the tax bill included billions of dollars to be taken into the inner cities to help businesses like minority businesses that need help getting going so that they could be successful and turn those cities around. And they've had unbelievable success. I mean, the stories are so good, okay? You got that. Then you've got situations like what we saw with Alice Johnson last night. I mean, he not only pardoned Alice Johnson, but the criminal, reform, justice reform is something that crossed party lines that nobody did until he was in office, that I think he clearly was a priority. I know Brooke Rollins, who's on his staff, she came from Texas and did that in Texas. And you start looking at these things, and then plus the lowest unemployment rate for African Americans in the history of the country. I think that he's tried to do those things. On the other side, I think that's why they've tried to paint him as a racist, because I think people like, Herschel Walker, which has been his friend for years, and, says that's just ridiculous.
Yeah, I've known you for 37 years, and I'm offended that you would think that I, for 37 years, would be the racist.
Yeah. And so you've got that, but I think he's really tried, and I think they've got some real successes. But I think the convention, there were a lot of black speakers who were very supportive of Trump, last night included, right? Yeah. I mean, probably almost half of the speakers. And so they're clearly making an attempt, and I think it's because it's in addition to wherever Trump comes from on this, I think it's clearly politically. I mean, when they're looking at the lineup of the RNC, mm-hmm. they are doing something. They think they can get a percentage of the black vote that they haven't. I've always said I think it would be so much more healthy if eventually the black vote in the United States was more split,
right?
So you
couldn't count on them one way or the other.
That way,
either count on them or discount them. Yeah,
that way, it would increase their power to be heard. Mm-hmm. If you're all in one camp, you're
taken for granted.
Those people think, "What the heck?" and the other people go, "Well, why am I going to do anything for them?"
Yeah.
But I think the more split it becomes, the healthier it is for our country.
Kelly makes the point that they're trying to paint Donald Trump as a racist. They are doing that, but it's worse than that, because they're trying to paint the whole country as
That's
racist.
True.
Systematic. That's true.
And this is a systemic racism that pervades the country, and I don't think that's a message that resonates with most people in the country. Whereas you say, yes, I've seen an incident here or there, or I understand this does happen, but it doesn't. I don't know anybody who I could even say, I know this person, and this person is a race. And most of us are trying to make sure we get along with everybody and treat them well. I mean, we like it when other people come in, and it's just, I just don't see that as the case. And the other thing on the inner cities, nothing has hurt African American people more than these riots in the inner cities,
right?
Because it is their businesses and that both that they own or that they patronize that are being destroyed. And I think you're going to find an awful lot of African Americans who say, this is what defunding the police looks like, and this destroys my area, my home.
I thought the strongest part of what he said last night, which is a little bit of a turn, I know, and so I'm sure that some of the people on the Democratic side might say it's not fair, but it was the president's point that how can you elect somebody to take over the country that is saying that the country is massively flawed and has it's like he really was presenting this to either you're you love the country, you know it's not perfect, but you know it's going to be better, or you don't like the country, you think everything should be sort of blown up and start all over again.
Yeah.
And that really is a little, I mean, I thought that was very well done. I think that most people think the positive approach of America. I mean, again, have there been improvements on race in the United States? Obviously, there have been. Are there ways to go? Yes. And it's that way in a number of different areas. But, pick another country where there's been more improvement. Pick another country that actually tries to make things better, that cares, that'll even listen to what you have to say. So I thought that was an interesting sort of juxtaposition between how you see America. And basically, the message was sort of, again, smart political message. If you see America as flawed and morally bankrupt, then vote Democrat. If you see it as a great country, et cetera, then vote Republican. I thought that was a pretty smart, move marketing-wise.
Almost every country has had slavery in the past.
That's right.
Almost everyone. And we're the only ones who are still trying to deal with the consequences. Most of them just moved on, but we're still trying to reconcile that and improve our past.
You mentioned just in passing Daniel Cameron, who is the youngest attorney general in Kentucky and first African American. And in some respects, again, you don't want to always count by race and age, but he's a twofer. Because first of all, the younger you are, the more likely you are to think this country is flawed, because you probably went to universities where your professors told you that. The younger you are, the more likely to believe in socialism. And if you're African American, you're definitely the case. So to get somebody that's 34 years of age who gave perhaps one of the most positive messages that you could possibly have imagined, I think he really has not only a future in the Republican Party, but was one of the best people to counter program against some of the things that were actually coming into the convention.
I'm especially fond of the Attorney General of Kentucky. I mean, we had a lawsuit out there on behalf of a church, and it was actually the first one in the country where we opened up the churches to be able to have in-person services as long as they did so in a safe manner. What the governor did was an overreach and violated the Constitution. Well, we would have won on behalf of one church, Tabernacle Baptist Church. But instead, the Attorney General, he saw that and he said, I'm jumping in with you because I want this injunction to be statewide. This is a guy I like, a big pro-religious freedom guy, in addition to being a rising star, black Republican who spoke at the convention.
I saw a few people that kind of lost perspective for a second and say, I want to see him on the national ticket in 2024. Well, maybe not, but nevertheless.
He'd only barely be older than that. He's 34 now.
He just is going to be 35 in November, so then he'd qualify. But nevertheless, that's another one of those footnotes.
AOC will be 35 then.
And as a matter of fact, they're actually saying that they are convinced that she will run against Chuck Schumer. Now, wouldn't that be an interesting race? But that's in the future. Let's keep to reality here for a few more minutes. So come back and talk about a few more things we've learned from the Republican and Democratic convention. Also have Kelly explain the platform and what's going on there right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Love to know your thoughts. We've had now a Democratic National Convention, a Republican National Convention. I suspect some of you have seen it. Most of you have not. The ratings have not been great for it, but nevertheless, if you did have a chance to see it, we wanted to get your thoughts. And also, more to the point, you really need to evaluate not only the presidential candidate, which we're talking about. In just a few minutes, we're going to talk about the more important election. We have 35 Senate elections, and that's going to be key. But one of the things we have done is last week we posted the Democratic National Platform. Kelly, we've posted the Republican platform, but as people click on that, they will see that it's the 2016 platform, and yet it is one that is now being used for the 2020. Give us some background on that, since I know you were going to be on the platform committee.
Yeah, the way the platform works at the Republican National Convention is the week before you come together for the big convention, the platform committee, what's called the resolutions committee, meets. The platform committee is made up of one male and one female from every state. So in each state, you elect or appoint, depends on how you've worked your own state rules. And so let's take Texas, for example. In Texas, there's 7,000-8,000 people get together at the state convention. They then elect the 100 and some odd people that go to the national convention from Texas. Those people then get into a room and they vote who's going to represent us on the platform. One male, one female. Who's going to do that on the rules committee, et cetera, et cetera. So what happens is it's a big group. Okay. They also do the territory. So it's it's over 100 when you think of 2 for every state and more. Think of that committee. That's a pretty big committee, okay? C-SPAN usually covers it, everything else. And they go through and they, make the platform and they make it current and they bring the new positions and all this. And what they did is when they realized that their convention was going to be canceled, that in fact in North Carolina, where you had a Democratic governor, he wasn't going to allow them to really have the numbers to even have the platform committee meet. They took a vote, and they actually ended up deciding to just stay with the platform from 4 years earlier, since they really didn't have the ability to have the kind of interaction and development that they wanted. Which it's a little weird. Well, it's a lot of weird, but it's especially a little weird because some of the things in the platform in 2016
are the accomplishments.
Well, so there's no accomplishments of what Trump did, right? So
which is why I think the speech last night was very long, because he wanted to put those up there. Yeah.
But the other thing is, there's comments in that platform like, the president is, really bad. Well, that was because they were talking about Obama. So anyway, it's a little unusual. But again, I think most people know the positions.
Sure.
You can look at those positions.
And those have not changed so much, have they?
They really haven't.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the thing that was missed would normally, if they'd have done the platform, it would have been updated just a little bit with some new issues. There'd probably be more on China than there was before,
right.
Et cetera. There'd probably be stuff about the FBI, abuse of the FBI and DOJ and going after a president, which is obviously a big deal. But I think the main thing was the list of accomplishments. I went through this myself. I did an interview day before yesterday from a reporter on the president and religious freedom. And it was hard. There are so many things. I mean, I'm talking about hundreds of official actions that have been very positive for religious freedom, that it was hard to go over the highlights. I mean, I did it, but I have forgotten more really good things on religious freedom in the last 3 to 3.5 years than I have ever seen done under any Republican or Democratic president. So there are a lot of these accomplishments that are lost. And I think that's what people are really voting on now, right? I mean, they're voting on, what did this president do?
Right.
What he says is not as important now as what he has done, because he's now proven what he will do. And so if you like all those things, whether it's reduced regulations, whether, you go through the list, then you're looking at that. And that's what they didn't have, which they usually would have in the platform.
So it raises the question, do platforms really make that much difference anymore? If you can sort of bring last term 2016 forward, is anybody going to pay much attention? And with the Democrats, if they can pass a platform, but we really know it's the Biden-Sanders unity agreement that's the platform, you have to ask the question, does the time come where platforms get shrunk down, we have their list of bullet points and we're done? Or
I don't think so. I think there would be a revolt, at least on the Republican side. There'd be a big, because
from the grassroots would be the revolt,
because that was Jared Kushner proffered that approach a number of months ago, and there was an explosion within the Republican base. I think, and here's the process, people don't understand. Let me sort of take you behind the curtains. When you go in the platform, there's this tension that goes on.
Oh, yes.
Because
you talked about that.
I went through this with President Bush, with the rest. The platform committee is more of, the base of what we really believe. And so it's sort of like the Bible for your party. I mean, what are your principles, your beliefs, your essential doctrines, right, that you're laying out? The candidate doesn't necessarily want to doesn't want a finer point on some of these things. They would rather be able to kind of waffle by and not be really nailed down in a strong way on all of these things to the nth degree. So the candidate's always trying to kind of, fuzz it up a little bit so it leaves them wiggle room to go where they need to go and not to offend anybody. But meanwhile, the base is trying to say, no, these are our principles. We are not. So there is a tension that goes on, and agreements have to be made. So I do think the platform is helpful in that, especially I think with Trump it was, because it communicated very clearly to him what this party expected of him, what the key, he's a great deal maker, constituency guy, right? He learned, here are the people that form your base: the pro-life movement, the religious freedom, the business side. That he could look at all these and see what are the key things they're demanding of me, and I'm going to make some promises, and I'm going to come through on those things to keep my group together. So I think in his case it was really helpful. I think it's going to be really big, as Merrill was just talking about a second ago, for Biden, because I think most people know Biden is kind of, he used to be sort of a moderate conservative. He's clearly not. He's had to drop all those positions in the primary. And so everybody knows it's sort of the Biden-Bernie agreement is sort of where he's going, which is much more liberal than we've seen before.
Let me just mention that real quickly because you mentioned it. And I noticed last night that President Trump was mostly quoting from what is called the Biden-Sanders Unity Task Force recommendations. And I will post that maybe on Monday just so we don't confuse people. But just to put it in perspective, the Democratic platform, 91 pages. The Biden-Sanders Unity Task Force recommendations, 110 pages, and very more specific. As a matter of fact, very fine points on things like the Green New Deal. You cannot find the words Green New Deal in the Democratic platform. And so in some respects, that may be a better way to understand what the future is if indeed you have a Joe Biden as president and a Kamala Harris as vice president.
Right. That's going to be the outline for them. And just to be clear, Bernie Sanders is one of the most principled politicians in the country. He would not have signed off on this unless he thought he was getting, 80% of what he wanted in there, 85%, Absolutely. Something like that. He would not have signed off on it. So even though Biden's going to try to say, well, no, we made a number of compromises, we pulled him back, Bernie Sanders will not support it unless it's going a big step in his direction.
And again, I was struck by the fact that last night, first of all, the president cited either things in the platform or in most cases in this agreement or words or things that Joe Biden said 41 times. People that take the time to count those up are the case. But almost every time when he was talking about what he predicted the Biden-Harris actual team would do, He never was quoting from the Democratic National Platform, and in every case that I could count, he quoted from the Biden-Sanders Unity Task Force recommendations, which tells you everything, right?
Right. Yeah, that's the blueprint.
In some ways, it's more fair to do that because this has got his name on it, right? The Democratic platform is the Democratic Party, but it's not necessarily what Biden says, right? This is something Biden has agreed to with the Sanders group, and I think it's probably much more accurate as to where things would go if he were president.
And Kamala be the enforcer.
Yes. Well, let's take a break. When we come back, I know Kelly will have to leave us about an hour from now, but so I wanted to do two things. Number one, get some of his comments about the see no evil media when it comes to the violence in the streets or the crisis the Democrats dare not mention. And then also we want to talk a little bit later about what some people think is the most important second election, and that is the United States Senate. So we'll talk about all of that right after this.
Question: will Americans vote to stop the riots, the looting, and the defund the police efforts in major cities across the country? The parties certainly understand that citizens, even those who sympathize with the peaceful George Floyd protests, are appalled at the violent turn some of the protests took. Most people abhor the violence and the destruction of businesses and the livelihoods of their owners and employees. Other than calls to defund police, we didn't hear a word about this at the Democrats' convention. Their party platform calls for removing Confederate monuments, but nothing about controlling the mobs that are often doing it. Neither is there a word of condemnation of the violence that is devastating their constituents who live and work in our cities. In fact, when federal agents are sent to protect federal property in these cities, as is their duty, the left cries foul and the media amplifies their opposition. But the general uptick in violent crime, including murder, in our cities has brought a systemic and sustained response from the feds. At a news conference last week in Kansas City, Missouri, Attorney General William Barr announced that federal state task forces have made more than 1,400 arrests as part of Operation Legend, an anti-crime initiative the Justice Department launched in early July. Under this initiative, the Justice Department has dispatched more than 1,000 federal agents to help local law enforcement investigate violent crime. This effort is named after Legend Taliaferro, a 4-year-old boy who was shot and killed in his sleep the morning of June 29th in Kansas City. The city's police, assisted by the FBI and U.S. Marshals, arrested his suspected murderer the second week in August. Operation Legend has expanded and is working now to restore peace to 8 additional cities. At his press conference, the Attorney General stated, "The most basic duty of government is to protect the safety of our citizens. Smart politicians won't ignore that." For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Kelly Shackelford, as well as Dr. Merrill Matthews. And I might just mention, in passing at least, one of the articles that came out here, why Republicans talk about abortion and Democrats don't. There was no mention of abortion as far as I could tell. Maybe there was a mention in the caucus or something like this, but no mention of abortion at all, partially maybe because of the fact that only 13% of Americans really agree with the current Democratic position of abortion through all 9 months. Even 18% of self-identified Democrats believe in that, and 80% of Americans actually oppose taxpayer-funded abortion. So first of all, abortion surfaced, obviously, in a very powerful way through Abby Johnson, the former Planned Parenthood clinic director.
Yeah, I think this is a real message to the pro-life community, sort of a little bit of a good night. You've made some progress. I mean, you've moved the country so much on the issue of life that at the Democratic convention, they don't even mention, pro-choice. There's some, I mean, you don't want to rest on your laurels, but that's some success that you've had in really advancing, sanctity of life. So, I mean, you would have never convinced me that would ever be something that you could say. I think I think there's a few real big problems I mean, there's a number of things, but I think for the Democratic Party long term, this is a difficult issue for them now, just because of the way it's polling. I think the younger generation is more pro-life. But the other one I think that I see rising is the school choice issue.
Mentioned so many times this week.
And,
wow.
And I think that's because it wasn't by accident. I mean, they're polling, they're all this. And I think this is another connection with the African-American community. African-American communities in these inner cities want to be able to put their kids in safe schools and good schools. School choice exists for people who have money already. It's only the people who don't have money who are trapped in these inner cities. So the natural policy for the regular base of the Democratic Party, if you exclude the unions, would be for them to have school choice. This is about poor people. It's about race. It fits many of the things. But they've got a problem because 1 out of every 4 or 1 out of every 3 people at their convention are with the teachers union, and the teachers union don't want that because it would create competition for them. And so you've got this weird conflict, which I think is going to lead to really a decision that will eventually have to be made. I think African-American voters are going to start moving to the side of school choice, which they're already at. And that's going to then put pressure on the Democratic Party to decide whose interests are you really going to support here. And I think those are long-term kind of issues that they're going to have to deal with.
So many things they didn't mention in the thing. The only thing they seem to think was an issue in the country right now is the pandemic. And Donald Trump's tweets.
Well, let's talk about one other one that wasn't mentioned. We were going to get into that. The crisis that Democrats dare not mention. And you go through this all week in the Democratic convention and just no acknowledgement at all of the riots that are taking place. And then all of a sudden, the polling seems to now suggest that, wait a minute, these are starting to cause people to rethink whether or not they want to vote for Democrats. And now you're starting to even have people on CNN saying, this rioting has got to stop. Don Lemon talking to Chris Cuomo saying it's showing up in the polling, it's showing up in focus groups, which I don't think is the best reason to finally talk about this, but it illustrates a point, doesn't it?
And Donald Trump pointed that out last night, that their polls are starting to go down as the riots are occurring. And it was interesting because, as I mentioned, we watched the show on CNN, and anytime the Republicans said something about they didn't mention it, then they'd go back, and Jake Tapper said, well, Joe Biden mentioned it yesterday. Joe Biden, well, the riots have been going on for months.
Yeah.
For months. And Joe Biden finally mentioned yesterday with a kind of a very bland statement of we need to, get this under control. And poor Jake Tapper just seemed like he was there to try to defend Joe Biden on anything that was said. But I was just amazed at how little they had to be able to respond to that, because none of the Democrats, there is no, apart from Joe Biden saying something Wednesday, there is no major elected Democrat that I'm aware of who has come out against these and said this is a problem, we need to address them. If anything, they've mostly been supportive of them.
Yeah, it's. I think this has been a real mistake for the Democratic Party. I mean, obviously they've done this. They've not spoken out as much because there's a progressive extreme base that they don't want to sort of tamp down their energy for the Democratic Party. But look, I walked through those lines last night.
I wanted you to finally get to that.
Out of the White House after the event, and I wish that Jake Tapper and all these people, I wish they would walk through that.
Like you did.
Yeah.
I found the video and sent it to you, and you said, there I am. Yeah. And I said, I found a video that was posted.
I think everybody's tune would change.
Yes, it would.
That's
Look at
not
Rand Paul, what he went through, everybody else.
Those are not protesters. They're not protesters. They're even worse than a mob in some way. And again, just because of my work in religious liberty, and I've been in a lot of rooms with a lot of battles over things that are spiritually kind of a key, and I have felt and I have seen things where I knew, I've known the Holy Spirit is here. There are things happening that there's no way these things should be happening. They're impossible. But I've also felt and seen a demonic presence.
Yes.
And that's exactly what I felt last night. These people were screaming, not like a chant or whatever. It was really evil, hateful. It's anybody who knows what I'm talking about is listening. When you felt the demonic, you know what that is. That's what that was.
Yeah.
These people, this BLM group I don't know if they're being paid, but I'm telling you that what they're channeling is incredible evil. And I think 98%, I don't know what it is, of Americans would reject that as soon as they saw it. And I think it's getting out. And I think the Democratic Party should have crushed this immediately. Mm-hmm. And instead, what they're doing is they're creating a lot of people. I mean, the suburban women vote, this is right up their alley, okay? Because this is not only happening, at first you thought, well, maybe it's in the major cities. Now it's being brought to your outside eating establishment.
Yeah,
you're being surrounded at your table.
If you don't hold up your hand as a sign of support for them in a fist, they encircle you and they scream at you and holler at you and sort of entrap you there. And it's very, very threatening.
And then they're coming into the suburban neighborhoods. So. This is a real mistake. And again, they still haven't really addressed it head on. Now, the argument is that the president did not, the Republican Party should have addressed the real issues of, what's happening with these police abuses and et cetera. And of course, the problem is some of these, the facts aren't what you first seem.
That is so true.
So you can't really address these things directly until you know what the facts really are. Because usually the first set of facts, they're not all right, Now the George Floyd situation, you see things and you see what's going on, but I do think, if you watched last night, Ben Carson was very specific about the fact that we do have to correct when there's abuses. So I do think those things are being mentioned, but I don't think anybody thinks the answer is violence and rioting and this type of evil thing where they try to intimidate people from even walking or speaking or having their own beliefs. That's not American.
Let's take a break, and of course we can talk about this issue of safety and security, which is showing up in the polls, and we'll do that right after this.
Sometimes I think about seeds. You ever stop to consider that some seeds become entire trees and some trees grow up and produce fruit? Other seeds become flowers or vines that bring us vegetables or berries. And some trees don't have fruit, but they're just pretty, especially in some parts of the country when it comes to the fall colors. Yes, sometimes my mind goes off like that. And I also think about such things when it comes to the seeds that so many have planted in the quest to impact our nation through Point of View Radio. You may think that your gift is a small thing, but like a seed, it can grow to have an impact beyond your imagination. If you want to see beauty again in America, consider planting a seed today and making a difference by joining the Point of View Truth Team. Get the details today, right now, by visiting pointofview.net/team or call us at 1-800-347-5151. Plant a seed for a great future. Cultivate truth. Pointofview.net/team. and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, and if you would like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. And I thought for just a minute, might talk about something that the Wall Street Journal called the more important election. Now, how you could call that more important than the presidential election, but I know what they're getting at, and that is the fight for the U.S. Senate. And they points out that right now the Republicans hold an advantage of 53 to 47 in terms of a majority, but the hold is very precarious because, okay, it's pretty likely that Republicans will pick up a seat in Alabama, but Republicans have to defend 8 seats. Now, we don't talk about these too often because we're a national program, but let me pick out 4 states real quickly and get some comments from Kelly Shackelford and Merrill Matthews. Because if you look at Maine, Susan Collins has been in really a kind of a tough battle. She trailed in a number of polls by 4 or 5 points. Now, that may change, but that's something. Martha McSally could be seen as sort of an incumbent, although it's sort of a quasi-incumbency, and it's one of those special elections. And she consistently trails Democrat Mark Kelly. We can go to Iowa, which to me was the biggest surprise for me, and I'll see what you guys have to say here. You had a couple of polls that showed Joni Ernst ahead, but still in a tight race. And then you go to Colorado, Cory Gardner down by about 6 points to John Hickenlooper, former governor, former presidential candidate. So it is more difficult to determine, but if indeed the Democrats take control of the Senate, I think, Kelly, one of the arguments being made by the editorial board here of the Wall Street Journal is the filibuster is gone, you know, in part because Barack Obama referred to it as a relic of Jim Crow. And I think that even the Senate minority leader, who would be, of course, the majority leader, Chuck Schumer, probably would simply go along with that because, as I mentioned before, might be challenged by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in 2 years. So in some respects, the election of the Senate determines all those candidates for the House and Senate and all sorts of other decisions, treaties. Most importantly, of course, the judges in the federal judiciary and treaties, and maybe even determining whether or not we'll add a few more states like Puerto Rico and the District of Columbia. So there's just a lot of things at stake in the Senate elections, aren't they?
Well, huge, yeah. I think one of the biggest things has been the judges, and it's big because it used to be in the past that we had a filibuster for judges, but the Democrats dropped that for a number of the judges, and then when they got to the Gorsuch nomination, it was dropped even for Supreme Court. And so now it's just a pure majority. As you say, if they drop the filibuster for everything else, that'll be it'll be really odd because the whole point of the Senate was to be the slower, more deliberative body. It takes more consensus. It's sort of a stopgap against extremism, what our founders called mobocracy. And the House is more of the mobocracy, right? You elect them every 2 years. It's just what the popular vote. It's whatever the whims of the people are. But the Senate was supposed to provide a buffer a little bit, and the filibuster was really a part of that. And if that's blown away, then we're gonna have a real problem. So it's big for 2 main reasons. One of which the filibuster, but the other is the judges. Trump's now at 201. I think he keeps saying 300.
I don't know where that comes from.
Yeah, I don't either. I think we'll be at 250 by the end of this year. I mean, we're working on a lot of these, making sure these are really high quality judges. And people can go to firstliberty.org, and we have a deal on the judges where you can look at the judicial seats, who these people are. You can look at all that information and see it. But to me, that's the biggest thing about the Senate is because those judicial appointments are lifetime appointments. And, of course, we're talking about probably the next 2 Supreme Court justices based upon, who wins the Senate. I think we'll see. But I think the Senate races are going to be dramatically impacted by the presidential race. And so it's going to sweep it one way or the other based upon who wins the presidential election.
The Senate filibuster gives the Senate some stability. So it's harder to get something passed. But the flip side is it's harder to come back after something's passed and get rid of it.
Yep.
So we see this on the executive orders. Barack Obama decided to start throwing all kinds of executive orders out there on major things that should have had congressional approval. Donald Trump comes in and he starts to rescind those things as much as the courts are letting him rescind these things. But you could have a Joe Biden with the Democratic Senate end up passing most of the Biden-Sanders approach. But if you come in the next president and you get a Republican House and Senate and president, they could come and start repealing everything. And so you have this sort of instability of being able to not know what we can do going forward.
Yeah, I think it's a really bad idea. It's one of the worst progressive ideas. And let's take it with the courts. They talk about court packing, right?
Yeah.
Which
that's the only one I was going to bring up.
What it means is right now there's 9 justices on the Supreme Court. Court packing would mean the Democrats would come in and they would add 4 more or whatever they wanted to do till they get their majority. Well, once you do that once, the Supreme Court is no longer a legal body; it's a political body. You've destroyed the Supreme Court. You've really destroyed our system of justice because it's just whoever has the raw political power to put their ideology on the court. That's very dangerous. The only way, and again, it was even tried under FDR when he had a hefty, majority in both the House and the Senate. Everybody realized that was such a bad idea that it hurt him pretty severely when he tried to push that through. The only way you could do that is if you destroyed the filibuster. And again, it would be really bad for the country. And I think that's an example of why getting rid of the filibuster is just bad, period, because as Merrill was saying, you just flip from 1 2-year period to the next. Everything can just change. All the laws can change. Everything can go one way or the other. And the filibuster has served a pretty strong stability purpose for a long time.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we might just talk about what we see in terms of the election. But Kelly Shackelford mentioned something. If you go to firstliberty.org, and I did, scroll to the bottom, it has a section called Judicial Nominees, and it shows you the number of vacancies and judgeships for the Court of Appeals, district courts, federal claims, and a variety of other things. So if you kind of like to know what it's looking like, or maybe you not even sure which particular circuit court you're in your particular state, you can find out more. But pay attention to these Senate races, 33 races, and then 2 more that are special, so 35. This is the first time we've ever had 35 Senate races all in one election season, so pretty significant, and those are going to ultimately determine the future of this country in so many different ways. And the long list of things that could happen include everything to right-to-work laws, card check, whether or not we'd have 2 more states like Puerto Rico and the District of Columbia, ballot harvesting, and the list goes on and on and on. I would hope that even if Democrats do control the Senate, they think long and hard about getting rid of the filibuster.
Yes.
They would rue the day, as they already are, when they got rid of it for the federal judgeship. So let's take a break. We'll come back and look at this. Is there a possibility that we are going to have maybe a landslide election, and then all these questions about voter fraud and mail-in ballots are not that important? Or would we have a close election, possibly even a constitutional crisis? We'll talk about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Some American cities may never recover. First, there was the coronavirus pandemic, then the lockdowns, and now the protest and riots. Joe Kotkin writes about the twilight of great American cities and wonders if we can ever reverse this downward trend. Another author is more pessimistic and declares that New York City is dead forever. The pandemic has exposed the danger of densely packed urban life. City dwellers find themselves in constant contact with people in crowded, unventilated places like subways, small apartments, elevators, and offices. According to the New York Times, some 420,000 people left New York City between March 1st to May 1st. This nearly equals the city's total population increase from 1950 to 2019. More and more people are telecommuting and don't anticipate returning to their pre-pandemic lives. A Stanford economist predicts that once the pandemic ends, the online workforce will have increased from 6% to closer to 20%. Rising disorder in the cities, along with a shocking rise in homicides in Los Angeles, Chicago, and New York, are forcing many to reconsider where they live. The head of Site Selectors Guild reports that few companies want to locate in a big city and are choosing suburbs, small cities, and rural areas. Politics is another reason cited for leaving cities. The progressive rule in cities like Seattle are why Amazon is moving to the suburbs and other locations. When cities want to significantly raise taxes and yet lessen police protection, companies and even small businesses will try to move. In the next few years, many of these cities will be a shadow of their former selves. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Loneliness, go to viewpoints.info/loneliness. That's viewpoints.info/loneliness.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. I know Kelly Shackleton would have to go in just a little bit, but I thought I'd get his comments and some from Dr. Merrill Matthews, and then we will, in this last half hour, get to a very good piece that has been written by Dr. Matthews on would Democrats have managed the pandemic better, and also some questions about whether or not we are running out of volunteers to work in the polling places. But Kelly Shackelford, before I get to this one, I love this. There'll never be another Trump rally like that one, because you were at it last night. I thought I'd go around the round table and get both of your comments first before I come back to you on just that. What about this? If we have what some people are predicting, a blowout election where you just have an enormous number of electoral votes either going for Joe Biden or for Donald Trump, then everything we've talked about in terms of mail-in ballots, voter fraud, all sorts of other things, even poll workers, which we'll talk about in this last half hour, are not an issue. But if we get even close, it will look like something like the election of 2000, and all three of us around the table remember what that was like.
I think it would be worse in a lot of ways. I'm really hoping for a blowout election, because I think what the poll we just looked at, I think only half of the country think that the election's going to be over on election night, and I don't think that's good for the country. Why? If people are listening, they go, well, I don't understand. Why is this going to be the case? Because of the COVID-19 situation, some people, in my view, they're using it as a way to push whatever political way they want voting, even if it's not a good way to vote. For instance, absentee ballots are something that we have really done a good job of controlling and doing those in a right way. where you send them to the people who ask for them, where there's a barcode and all this. But what they're talking about now in a number of these states, not talking about what they're going to be doing, is just mailing ballots in the mail to people who don't even ask for them. And we're talking about anywhere from 50 to 80 million. And it's just a recipe for disaster in a lot of ways. It's a recipe for voter fraud, right? There's been lots of stories on this of how, you look in the trash can and there's 10 of them in the trash can, and somebody just pick them up, fill them out, put them in the mail. But I think even more so is the disenfranchising of people, because we just had an election in New York. We've had one, I think it was New Jersey, where 25% of the ballots sent in were disqualified. So people think they're voting and they're not voting. It's a really bad idea. And so I hope this doesn't happen, because it's going to be chaos if it's close. And if these states that have this type of thing, and then you're going to have people wondering if it's being counted well. That's what makes the other part of what you said very important. There's a lot of people, most people who are at the polls, the election officials, et cetera, are older. If those people are concerned about getting COVID-19, then they might 2 or 3 days before the election say, I'm not real comfortable with this. Well, people need to go right now and say, I'm going to volunteer to be an election worker. I want to be trained, so that you're ready at that time, and we have good people counting these things and watching over these things in every area, not just your area, in all areas of your state. So it's a very great concern. I hope we have an overwhelming, but if not, I think the general consensus of experts is that this will go on for a while after Election Day, which, again, I don't think that's what we really want for the country.
And even that's a problem, because we have a law which says when the electors are supposed to meet in December,
yes, true,
and cast their vote. So you have roughly a month to be able to decide that. And then you have the inauguration day is set by set in the Constitution. So, as you know, Kelly, legal issues can sometimes go out for months and months. What do you do if you have legitimate challenges being raised either by Democrats or Republicans on 2 or 3 states, and they can't come to a decision by the time of the electoral vote that they're supposed to do in December, or if they can't even come, even if that's a law, so Congress could say, okay, well, we'll pass something and extend it, but now you've got the Constitution in January where the president has to be inaugurated by then, and if we go to that, you may have either Donald Trump would already have a team in place, but if it's Joe Biden, he would probably try to get a team up and running, hoping he actually gets it, but he may not. I mean, this is a real nightmare.
And you didn't even mention that if there's a contest and a disagreement, who decides this? It's not really a court. It's the House of Representatives.
Yeah, that's right.
And it's not by vote of the House of Representatives, because right now that would be a heavy Democrat vote. It actually, if it was right now, it would be Republican, because it's every state gets one vote.
Right.
And the Republicans have them outnumbered, by one state. But this will be after the election, so we don't even know. So, I mean, it could really be bad.
And to get people more upset, Hans von Spakovsky was pointing out the other day, there is a federal law that says if you have not made that decision by January 20th, then the Speaker of the House becomes president.
That's right. Nancy Pelosi would be president.
Which,
you ruined my day.
Which, by the way, Mark Levin said, well, I think we would challenge that one from a constitutional point of view. But all of that, we hope none of that happens.
Yes.
But, Ari Fleischer, who we quoted recently, just said, I don't want anybody to go through what Al Gore and George W. Bush went through. And we certainly don't want the country to go through this.
Well, I think there's 2 big lessons for every listener. Number 1, vote in person. Okay? Right. If you can. If you can't vote in person, go ahead and make sure right now you're doing the absentee vote. Again, I think if you're 80 years old and you have a comorbidity, we understand. But otherwise, if you can do it safely, make sure and vote. And then number 2, make sure if you're younger out there, if you're not, 70, or let's say you're already immune. I was just with a guy who's like 80-something years old, but he's already had it. So he's like Superman, right? He can walk into anywhere. Well, go volunteer to be an election worker.
Yeah.
What a great way to do something for your country that everybody can do. You might say, well, I don't know how to do that. Well, just call your party. Just call, if you're a Republican or Democrat, call your party and say, how do I volunteer to be an election worker and get my training? and they're probably looking for people all over the place right now.
This could be so self-defeating for Democrats because they have tended to wave the flag that this is a dangerous to go to the polls. So if they discourage many of their voters from going to the polls, then they may get a lower turnout. Or if they encourage more of their people to vote by mail, they may end up having a lot of those ballots rejected. So I just simply don't know why Democrats are doing that, because either way you go, you may have a lot of may have more Democratic votes not counted, and that would end up hurting their chances.
And what Merrill's saying is exactly right. It doesn't make sense, and that's why the biggest theory on the Republican side is voter fraud. And so you sure hope that doesn't happen, but that's why you have good people that are counting these things, that are looking at these things, that are making sure. And again, not just where you live, but all over the state, in every district of your state, that this is going to be such an unusual election, or it could be, that it'll be important that everybody feels good about the process.
Let's take a phone call. We'll go to Maine, WSEW. Steve, thank you for calling today.
Hi, thank you for taking my call. Hopefully I'm on back roads. So my question is about the electors. And I remember in the last election there was situations where the electors would say that they're not going to vote the way that the actual...
The faithless electors.
Yes.
And I was wondering about what are the laws governing that, and what are the rules?
Every state kind of has its own, they get to decide, how their electors are. But the Supreme Court, I'm just going from memory, and I didn't read this case very closely, but as I recall, the Supreme Court ruled the state can bind the electors,
right. Mm-hmm.
Which I think is I don't know whether that's what the Constitution says or not. I hadn't looked at it closely enough. But as a policy matter, I like it because otherwise it would just be horrible if your state could create these rules for who's your electors and then they decide to show up and be some sort of protester by saying, no, I know the state all elected, so-and-so, but I'm going to cast mine for somebody else. So,
and you remember, Charlie Sheen in December of 2016 came out with an ad saying, you electors, don't change. Don't go and vote for Donald Trump. Go and vote for Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, I think it was Martin Sheen, but still, that's right.
I'm sorry, I said Charlie.
What you meant. But again, the reason they came up is because you had one elector in Colorado that did vote, and then one in the state of Washington that was removed because of that. So the quick answer, since we're coming to a break, Steve, is I think the Supreme Court has clarified that states can bind those individuals. And let me use the state of Texas. Kelly, you know this only so well because when we go to a state convention, we make sure that person is not going to jump ship.
That's
so
right.
That is certainly the case. But I know you need to get on, but we have some other things to talk about with Dr. Merrill Matthews, and it's just been great to hear what you've had to share from the president's speech last night. So let's take a break. Let me encourage you right now to go to First Liberty. You can find some great information there. When we come back, we're also going to talk about some material at the Institute for Policy Innovation. So all of it's on our website. Let's take a break. We will cover some other very important points right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour. If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Just as a program note, let me just mention that next week we have Harry Jackson with us. We have Nick Adams. Michael Knowles will be with us. I know Abby Johnson will be joining us around the round table on Friday. So those are just a few people that you would know that we are certainly talking to and talking with next week. And we'll be getting into so many different issues. So I hope you'll join us every single day. Dr. Merrill Matthews with us. And one of the things we mentioned with Kelly Shackelford, he really kind of got my attention, was John Fund has written this piece about the fact that we seemingly are facing a real shortage of volunteers. But while I mentioned John Fund, if you go to your website, ipi.org, you're having a conversation with John Fund. Used to be with Wall Street Journal, now, of course, with National Review, and it's on mail-in ballot and voter fraud. So if you go to ipi.org, used to be that if you went to one of your events, you had to be in Dallas. But now it doesn't matter. Anywhere in the country.
The event with John Fund is a Zoom event, so people can go to ipi.org and click on that and sign up for it. And that'll be on Tuesday, September 1st at 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Central Time. But we're encouraging people to join us, and he'll make a presentation, and then we'll throw it open for questions, so they can even ask a question or make a comment.
And so, again, if you'd like to join with them, it is a great opportunity to hear from John Fund, who's been on the program with us before, and you can hear his presentation, which Kelly has heard, and I know you are familiar with. It is very well done. But John Fund also talks about the fact that, look, even Dr. Anthony Fauci said there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to vote in person. But that maybe is going to be a justification still for mail-in ballots. But there's a bigger issue that John Fund's writing about, and that is simply this. When you look at the number of poll workers, a high percentage of them, 58% at least 2 years ago, were age 61 or older, which puts them kind of more vulnerable to the coronavirus. And so we need about, in round numbers, 900,000 poll workers to make sure that everything runs smoothly. And you can imagine, as Kelly was just saying a minute ago, that some might just say, you know, I just think even though I've been a poll worker all these years, and I get all of $75 for 12 hours of work, I think I'm going to pass on that. So there's really a push right now to try to get younger people. And I would just encourage any listener that says, I want to make sure that we have integrity at the polls, volunteer now and then go and actually be a poll watcher.
And I have not done that because I typically try to stay out of actually explicit political things like that. But I've talked to people who've done it, and they tell me how much they've learned. In some cases, come away with some concerns about, I saw this happening and that happening from somebody else there, and I thought that was inappropriate. So it really is a way to learn about our democracy and also to protect it.
Yes. And one of the callers off air didn't want to get on, but he says, you know, we have so many states, you know, more than 30 states that are talking about approving mail-in ballots. But when push comes to shove, you have about a handful of states that have done mail-in balloting for a long time. And as a matter of fact, even states like Washington State had to go through a few cycles to actually get that down to something that at least looks somewhat effective. But the harsh reality is I think some of these states might approve the idea, but they're going to recognize that they're going to run into all sorts of problems trying to get the ballots out in time, trying to get them back in time, and looking at some of the deadlines. And, of course, there was this huge conspiracy theory that we talked about a couple of weeks ago that somehow Donald Trump was manipulating the Postal Service. But I think a lot of them are going to say, yes, we approve mail-in ballots, but I just don't know that they're really going to do that.
And as the head of the Postal Service now, DeJoy, tried to make clear in his testimony for Congress that all he was trying to do was encourage states to get those ballots out early so that people could get them, fill them out, and mail them back in. He said because of the class of the mail, I think it typically takes like 10 days. It could take 10 days to get there, and some of them are not mailing it out except for 10 10 days before the election, with the hope that they will get there by that time. The person can fill it out and get it back. And in some cases, some of the states don't even have postmarks on these. So if they have a restriction that says it has to be postmarked by the election, but we don't have a postmark on here, we don't know whether this is a valid ballot or not.
And again, already there's, I think somebody estimated about 150 different lawsuits. This comes from Hans von Spakowski. John Fund will probably give you an update on that on Tuesday. And you know that there are going to be some that are saying, well, we want to count every ballot. Yeah, but we don't know if some of those ballots are valid. And so this is where we get into this constitutional crisis possibility.
And the news came out earlier this week that roughly a little over 500,000 ballots across the country have been rejected. Because, and this is NPR, I know, reporting it. They were based upon another one of the surveys, but that's over 500,000 ballots have been rejected. If you want your vote to count, you need to go in person and make it there.
Yes. So again, a lot of people say, well, is this going to be the end of the republic as we know it? Let's hope not, but we could be headed for a crisis. Let's hope, as we've both and all of us have said, let's just hope that it's a complete disaster in another sense for one of the parties, because if indeed it isn't a landslide and a disaster for one party or the other, then it will be a disaster for the country if it's a close election, right? So anyway, I'm having some fun with the words. But
and Donald Trump pointed out last night that he was there in the White House. This is where we're living here. Possession is 9 points of the law, 9 tenths of the law. So
I love that. Yeah, we're here and they're not. And I thought, oh boy, here we go again. Let me just, before we run out of time here, because I know some people might be interested in this, and that is you wrote a very good article, and we have posted it on the website. Would a Democrat have managed the pandemic better? We have heard this from, of course, the former Vice President Joe Biden. We've heard this from a number of other people in the Democratic Party. We've heard it sometimes even from people in the media. Okay, so it's a fair argument, and you really take us through whether or not the response was too slow, whether Trump actually listened to the experts, whether this whole issue of massive unemployment is his fault, and even the so-called death rate. So walk us through this, because I think, first of all, this helps answer the question. And for a lot of our listeners, if they're out on Facebook or Twitter, or they're just having a conversation with somebody who said, well, Trump did such a terrible job of managing the pandemic, you're just saying, look, I recognize the president made some mistakes, and they're probably significant ones too, but some of the criticism isn't really justifiable if you get back into the facts.
So if our listeners don't hear anything else, hear this. The same party who had 3.5 years to get the Obamacare healthcare.gov website up and running so that it would work in October 2013. And the thing was a complete disaster. It was a complete disaster. Whereas Barack Obama had to go out and say, well, government doesn't do technology very well. They're the ones who are saying if we were in charge of the pandemic, we would have done a very good job. And in fact, there's no reason to think they would have. You can criticize Trump. Some of the criticism is after the fact, in hindsight. Maybe you should have done this or should have done that. But you don't know at the time, because you have people from both sides saying, if you don't do this, we're going to have a terrible time. Or if you do this, we're going to have a terrible time. So they're trying to work through a pandemic that they thought might have been like some of the past ones, where some people were affected, but not that many. And it turned out to be much more contagious than people thought it would be. It was spread much more widely than we thought it might be. On the other hand, we've had a lot of deaths, tragic, but not nearly as many deaths as the London College, the Imperial College, thought it being 2.2 million deaths. So it is. For any politician who does this, I'm going to give them a little bit of wiggle room here, some flexibility, because you don't know, and you're getting a lot of contradictory advice on this, and you're trying to figure out what's the best thing to do.
To me, one of the most powerful arguments was you point out that on March 2nd, you have the New York Governor Andrew Cuomo basically saying the risk is very low.
Right.
And so if indeed Donald Trump on that day had done anything to declare it a national emergency, they would have just said he was overreacting, right?
Overreacting, right. And it's only 11 days later, on March 13th, that he did declare it a national emergency.
So where's the slow part? I don't see that.
I don't either. In fact, on March 2nd, when Cuomo was saying we're not having a problem in New York, Donald Trump was meeting in the White House with drug company CEOs to try to ensure that they were going as fast as they could to develop a vaccine. So he was actually taking a number of steps in that direction.
So again, I will come back and pick out just one or two other pieces there, but you're going to hear this, and it's going to be said a number of times. And of course, you're also going to be not only paying attention to what the president is saying, but as we talked about, we have senatorial races, congressional races. You even have 43 states have state legislative races, 13 states have governor's races, and you're going to hear some of that. And if you want to see what I think is a very fair, honest look at some of the arguments, we looked briefly at the one on the response was too slow. But was it true, and is it true, that Donald Trump did not listen to the experts? What about, as we mentioned just a minute ago, the death rate and some of the other claims that are being made? And I think this is the value of this piece by Dr. Merrill Matthews, which you can use in your conversation with others. Let's take a break. We'll continue talking to him right after this.
Question: will Americans vote to stop the riots, the looting, and the defund the police efforts in major cities across the country? The parties certainly understand that citizens, even those who sympathize with the peaceful George Floyd protests, are appalled at the violent turn some of the protests took. Most people abhor the violence and the destruction of businesses and the livelihoods of their owners and employees. Other than calls to defund police, we didn't hear a word about this at the Democrats' convention. Their party platform calls for removing Confederate monuments, but nothing about controlling the mobs that are often doing it. Neither is there a word of condemnation of the violence that is devastating their constituents who live and work in our cities. In fact, when federal agents are sent to protect federal property in these cities, as is their duty, the left cries foul and the media amplifies their opposition. But the general uptick in violent crime, including murder, in our cities, has brought a systemic and sustained response from the feds. At a news conference last week in Kansas City, Missouri, Attorney General William Barr announced that federal state task forces have made more than 1,400 arrests as part of Operation Legend, an anti-crime initiative the Justice Department launched in early July. Under this initiative, the Justice Department has dispatched more than 1,000 federal agents to help local law enforcement investigate violent crime. This effort is named after Legend Taliaferro, a 4-year-old boy who was shot and killed in his sleep the morning of June 29th in Kansas City. The city's police, assisted by the FBI and U.S. Marshals, arrested his suspected murderer the second week in August. Operation Legend has expanded and is working now to restore peace to 8 additional cities. At his press conference, the Attorney General stated, "The most basic duty of government is to protect the safety of our citizens. Smart politicians won't ignore that." For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, let me just mention that if you were listening online, as you may do, we have, of course, the commentary by Penna Dexter. She'll be with us next week and has been out enjoying something that sort of is like a vacation. I think she's in a RV.
Do people take those these days?
I don't know. I remember Bill Engvall who says RV stands for Ruins Vacations, but this is the second time she and her husband have gone out on an RV. Whatever. But anyway, she'll be back next week. But her commentary is called Operation Legend, and it's based upon the fact that you had this 4-year-old boy by the name of Legend Taliaferro who was killed when he was sleeping in Kansas City. So they call this particular outreach put together by the Attorney General William Barr Operation Legend, and points out, if you haven't seen the commentary, the fact that now they've made about 1,400 arrests. Last time I talked about it, there were about 1,000 arrests of Operation Legend, and this is an attempt to really address this issue of violent crime. And she points out, as we've already talked about, Dr. Matthews, that this wasn't mentioned a whole lot in the Democratic convention.
Right.
Mentioned quite often in the Republican convention. And so we'll see if that affects voting, but that was kind of the commentary here. And she points out that at the press conference, the Attorney General said the most basic duty of government is to protect the safety of our citizens. And I've done some commentary in which we are starting to see with some of these polls that when people are asked what are the most important issues, economy is always up there, some of social issues are, but the words like safety or security are showing up. And I think a lot of that has to do with what's going on in our cities.
You don't want to see the things that are happening in these major cities move out to the suburbs, which is why I said in a piece a little while back that Donald Trump has been losing ground in the suburbs. The riots in the big cities may very well get him that support back.
That's for sure. Let me come back to the piece real quickly. Got a few minutes before we are done for the day. And that is that one of the points you made here is the question about was the response too slow? And you took us back to the fact that on March 13th, that is when Donald Trump declared the pandemic to be a national emergency. But how many people had died even on March 13th?
By March 13th, we had 6 deaths in the country.
That's amazing.
And just over 90 cases reported. So it did not look like a pandemic at that time. Now, the health experts were saying this is going by community spread, so it's going to get much worse. But by April 17th is when we actually sort of peaked on the 7-day average of deaths, and we started going down significantly. It's had an uptick here recently, but within just a little over a month after he declared a national emergency, we sort of reached the peak of it. And so Democrats keep saying the Republicans are ignoring this. It's like the thing didn't even happen. It certainly happened. They mentioned it, but by and large, we're trying to get past it. we're struggling to get past it, but by and large, we're trying. And the economy's been coming back.
I would think so. One of the other ones that you deal with is Trump didn't listen to the experts. And I like how you respond to that. Which comments by the experts did he not listen to, right?
Well, the face mask. In January and February, the Attorney General, the Surgeon General, the head of the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, and even Dr. Fauci had mentioned you don't need to be wearing masks. In fact, the Surgeon General was very, very...
Stop buying masks, Jerome
buying
Adams.
Masks.
Yeah, and what I like about this is for people that want to post this on their Facebook page, Robert Redfield says there's no role for these masks in the community. And, of course, the Surgeon General, Jerome Adams, who I would like, a very nice man, stop buying masks, and they're not effective in preventing the general public from catching the coronavirus. So which particular things do you want to be listening to?
If you were Joe Biden demanding people wear a mask in January, February, even early March, you would have been going against the experts.
Just, again, a nice one. While we're talking about Joe Biden, one of the others he talks about is the fact that 50 million people have filed for unemployment. And this gets into something I noticed at the Democratic National Convention, and I've seen even this week as you've had Democrats respond to the Republican convention, heads I win, tails you lose. In other words, you cannot win because if indeed you didn't have the lockdown, then you're irresponsible. But when you have the lockdown, guess what? You have unemployment, right?
You have very high unemployment. And the amazing thing is Joe Biden doesn't seem to see the contradiction because he says if the experts recommend it, he would lock down the country again. Well, it's the lockdowns that ended up costing the jobs. And, of course, Joe Biden can't lock down the country, I don't think, constitutionally. It was the governors who locked down the country, and it was Republican governors and Democratic governors that locked down their respective states. Some more, some harsher restrictions, some not as harsh, but that's what ended up causing the people to lose their jobs and creating the unemployed. So you're telling me on the one hand that you would lock down things even as you're complaining about the number of people who are unemployed. Well, one is a direct result of the other.
Yes, well done. And then, of course, the death rate. We've heard that before, even in the Democratic Convention. The highest death rate. I'm not sure the death rate, the number of deaths, yes, but we have 350 million people, so we have more people than Sweden and Norway and Italy. And even when you compare us to some that seem to do better, South Korea, well, now they're kind of getting a little bit of a problem.
They're coming back. And even though for a standard season for the flu, the death rate's going to be about 25 to 55,000, but in a year where we have a very serious flu, it can be up into the 150 or 60,000.
So again, this is one of the articles we've posted for you to look at, and I would hope that you would do so. But let's talk about what's available at ipi.org, because again, if people want to hear from John Fund, they can do that. Mm-hmm. But also, you've got some other great pieces here on company-administrated health care, as well as minorities are skeptical of Democrats' latest conspiracy, and all sorts of great pieces. So what will they find when they land at your website?
Well, we cover a number of various policy issues there, where they're talking about health policy, welfare, Social Security, technology, intellectual property, and so we cover things and write about those. So all that's there available for people to go and consume and share. And then, of course, as you pointed out earlier, we've got the link there to, if they want to hear about voter fraud and mail-in ballots. This is the time. This is the biggest issue running in the country right now. And so if you want to find out more about that, come to the IPI website. We've got John Fund coming on Tuesday afternoon to talk about this. He used to be with the Wall Street Journal for many years and been with National Review here for several years. But he'll be there with us on Tuesday afternoon to discuss that, and people will be able to come on by Zoom and listen to his presentation and even ask questions.
And as they go to the website, if they have questions about, say, healthcare issues or energy, that's kind of your expertise. Mm-hmm. You have colleagues that have expertise in technology issues and a variety of others. So I hope people will take the time to go and find out more about ipi.org.
Right. They can sign up for Second Look, which is our summary of what we did the week before. So they can sign up for that, and they can respond to those and reach out to us if they have a question or comment.
Well, I appreciate you being here these last 2 weeks, and we had a chance first to look at the Democratic National Convention, now the Republican Convention, and I guess the campaign now really does begin.
It kicks into gear.
Yeah. Well, let's take a break, and then we will come back here on Monday. Let me just give you an advance notice here. We'll have a chance to talk with Harry Jackson, so we'll be talking about kind of the African-American vote and where that goes. Nick Adams will be with us, and we'll talk about some of those issues. Michael knows somebody I've been wanting to get on for a while because he has his own talk show, but has just a great deal of insight and is entirely too smart for somebody all of 30 years of age. But nevertheless, he will be with us. And then by Friday, we have Abby Johnson, and those are just a few people I mentioned. Some of the other guests will be very interesting for you as well, but maybe you don't know them quite as well. So again, you can go to the website pointofview.net, and you're going to find a couple of things. We've posted a couple of very good pieces on the choice between two parties and two visions, because we want you to now kind of do a comparison, and you're talking to your friends and neighbors and coworkers, maybe even family members, two very different visions of America. Very good piece, which we didn't talk about today, by Foster Freeze, who will be with us during our Truth Team on America's Uncivil War. And, of course, the piece that we just mentioned by Dr. Merrill Matthews, Would a Democrat Have Managed the Pandemic Better? All sorts of great material. It's all available for you, so go to the website, pointofview.net. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. Have a great weekend. See you back here on Monday.
Sometimes I think about seeds. You ever stop to consider that some seeds become entire trees and some trees grow up and produce fruit? Other seeds become flowers or vines that bring us vegetables or berries. And some trees don't have fruit, but they're just pretty, especially in some parts of the country when it comes to the fall colors. Yes, sometimes my mind goes off like that. And I also think about such things when it comes to the seeds that so many have planted in the quest to impact our nation through Point of View Radio. You may think that your gift is a small thing, but like a seed, it can grow to have an impact beyond your imagination. If you want to see beauty again in America, consider planting a seed today and making a difference by joining the Point of View Truth Team. Get the details today, right now, by visiting pointofview.net/team or call us at 1-800-347-5151. Plant a seed for a great future. Cultivate truth. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.